Good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome to the 2022 Goalmakers National Conference. I'm so excited to have everyone here virtually and wanted to introduce myself and kick us off for today. I'm Kristen Dailey. I'm the Executive Director at Global Washington. And if you don't know, Global Washington is a network of nonprofits, for-profits, academic institutions, and foundations who have a presence in Washington state and do work in low and middle income countries to improve lives. This is actually our 13th annual conference. And this year it's unique because we have one day that's fully virtual for today. And then tomorrow we have one day that's fully in person in Seattle. The conference is a place where people come together as global development practitioners. And people have told me it's something they look forward to every year. It's a place to recharge and find peers, find those who that want to learn with you to advance the work of global development. We're also a place where people find new partnerships. Global Washington truly believes that in order to be effective in global development, it has to be based on partnerships. Today, we have people from joining us all over the world, both as speakers and participants. And we have an incredible lineup of speakers today. The conference theme is about co-creation for global development. In thinking about this theme, we decided that COVID really disrupted the work of global development. It really caused people to do things differently, to think differently about their processes. For those of us who live in the United States and work in headquarters in the United States, we couldn't get on planes and go work with our staff in other countries. It forced us to think about the processes of how we do things differently, which included having more decision-making made in proximity to where the work is done. It also allowed us to build up staff capacity outside the United States. These are really good things, and we think that this is part of the co-creation model that we want to keep that came out of COVID. But we also want to make sure that we don't go back to the way we did things in 2019. We want to take this model of really working with the field staff to have more people involved in the process of problem definition and finding solutions. So that's what today is really about. It's really hearing from people all over the world to figure out how we do a better model for global development. The other thing I just want to talk about is that as the theme is co-creation, we know we can't do co-creation on a virtual platform in one day. What we really want to do is inspire all of you to take the principles of co-creation back to your work. And it really is a way for all of us to change our mindset and think differently about how we do our work so that we can take advantage of the tools that we have, the technology that we have, and again, the way we have come out of COVID to do things differently. So with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker. I'm extremely excited to have her with us today. This is Naina Subberwal Batra, and she's the CEO of AVPN. And again, you can read her bio, but I just want to add that she was in Seattle earlier this year, and I had the privilege of hosting a roundtable discussion with her. And if you've ever met Naina in person, you can tell that her passion comes through for her work. What also comes through is her determination for action. She has built an incredible network through AVPN of over 600 members across 33 countries in Asia. And again, she's not just about gathering people, she's about action. She has created new innovative services, including a collaborative pooled fund. Today, she's going to talk to us about trust-based philanthropy, which really aligns with our whole concept of co-creation. So with that, I'll turn it over for Naina for our first remarks. Naina?
Thank you so much, Kristen. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to be here. And I'm joining you from Singapore. It's a little late at night. It's a little past midnight, but it's great that the conference is virtual, so I can at least get to speak to you all about a topic that's really, really close to my heart. When I met Kristen in Seattle earlier this year, and she asked me if I would be interested, I really jumped on the opportunity because I really believe that trust-based philanthropy is so important. As I said then, we are in a sector where it's very unique, right? We tell experts how to do, as non-experts, we sometimes tell experts how to do their work. So in that sense, it is something that is very, very unique. I'm going to start by sharing my screen so that we are all able to see what I'm going to be talking about. So I hope this works. It did when we practiced it. So yeah, I think I'm just going to try and see if I can. There we go. There we are. Okay. I think that should work. So as Kristen mentioned, the past 2 years have not been easy, and the journey ahead definitely looks to be an uphill one for all of us who work in the development space. There have been severe setbacks to the Sustainable Development Goals due to disruptions, not just from COVID, but also the war in Ukraine, that have been difficult not only on an individual level, but have also resulted in high levels of inflation and weak economic recovery. Since the pandemic started, for 99% of the global population, incomes have fallen, and more than 160 million people across the world have been forced into absolute poverty. The pandemic has widened the gender gap from 99 years to 135 years, meaning that it will take another generation for women to just reach parity. Global fossil carbon dioxide emissions are on the rise again after a temporary fall due to the COVID-19 pandemic, increasing by 5.3% in 2021 as compared to 2020, almost reaching pre-pandemic 2019 levels. The funding gap to achieve the SDGs by 2030 is now at the glaring amount of more than $4.2 trillion US dollars. This is a staggering number, but if you look at it in comparison to another number, it only represents 1.1% of all assets held by banks and institutional asset owners globally. We are all here engaged in the work that we do because we see our role in addressing the huge systemic social and environmental issues that plague the world together. The COVID-19 pandemic was destructive, but it also proved indisputably for our community, whether we are philanthropists or private sector actors or nonprofits, that large-scale challenges such as these cannot be addressed sustainably through unilateral effort. According to Bridgespan, the highest number of philanthropic collaboratives established in a single year was in 2020, right as the pandemic was unleashing its full wrath. Should everyone have acted alone, the burden on frontline support organizations to coordinate this well-intentioned support would have been insurmountable, let alone the level of duplication, the level of waste, and inequity in reach. At AVPN, we see our role in working alongside funders and resource providers to facilitate this agenda and build trust amongst all actors, encouraging funders to re-examine their relationships with grantees to drive an impact which is collective, inclusive, and sustainable. So who is AVPN? Excuse me. AVPN is a member network, as Kristen mentioned, with more than 600 members across 33 markets. Our particular advantage is the local representatives we have in many of these markets each with a strong understanding of the local ecosystems and their experience in bringing together investors and organizations towards social change. In Asia, confronted by the fallout from the pandemic, philanthropists wanted to take decisive action and swiftly, but they struggled. First, there was a lack of first-hand information. With everyone at home and under lockdown, there was no way of meeting local leaders and organizations to conduct due diligence as they would have done in the past. Second, needs were in constant flux and situations were worsening quickly. So they came to us for support. We provided connections and information from the ground. We set up a microsite to help with the coordination of efforts, and we were constantly on social media, even WhatsApp, helping our members coordinate and collaborate in various ways. Very quickly, our members recognized that a lot of people and organizations were slipping through the cracks. They were quite astute in realizing that we could actually help them address this. We had been seeing the idea of trust-based philanthropy and collaborative giving in the months prior to COVID-19 through reports and convenings, and our members took us up on the challenge. 6 corporate members came together to pool resources for primary healthcare and COVID-19 resilience, trusting AVPN to coordinate funding and identify the most worthy recipient organizations. This was in January 2021. Since then, we have mobilized more than $11 million in unrestricted funding across 7 different funds, focused on thematic areas like sustainability, gender equality, digital transformation, and STEM education. We are also in the process of raising a $25 million gender equality fund. It is clear then that it is only through partnership and collaboration that we can even think of making the path ahead one that is marked by intentionality, inspiration, and trust. We have already started pushing our members on the lines of unrestricted fundings. And there are 3 factors that we keep in mind when we talk about our pooled funds. We believe wholeheartedly that our funding will be unrestricted. This comes from our own experience of needing to pivot quickly in the eye of the pandemic. There was no such thing as business as usual. And if all our funding had been tied up in programs, we would have not been able to, 1, deliver, or 2, survive. We knew that there were many other organizations like ours that would also benefit from unrestricted resources or trust-based giving. Trust through unrestricted funds gives impact organizations the flexibility that they need to deliver positive outcomes. The room for dynamism and courageous innovation is especially valuable in times of uncertainty and shifting contexts. For example, one of our members, the International Institute of Rural Reconstruction, or IIIR, received our healthcare pooled funds to intensify its COVID response in the Philippines. It uses these grants for urgent non-programmatic funding, such as operational costs and capacity building for staff, without having to rely on funders' approval, which is often multi-level and requiring long processing times. Flexibility in program implementation to address unforeseen issues and emerging knowledge allows an organization to be nimble and to respond quickly to a landscape that is constantly changing. Assist, one of our other grantees that works on the health education and training front, has managed to quickly change the target of their health and vaccine training to focus more on the urban poor communities when they identified the collective reluctance towards viral vaccine in this part of the community. AVPN pooled funds are therefore the embodiment of the trust that our members have in us. Even though we were first-time fund managers with no real track record, our members stepped forward to support the pooled funds. They relied on us to be transparent about our process, thorough in our due diligence, and more importantly, intentional about how we track and communicate the impact of the grant funding that is deployed. So how do we do trust-based philanthropy? First and fundamentally, trust-based philanthropy is founded on an open and continuous dialogue between funders and grantees. Interestingly, this is not a very common occurrence. A couple of months ago, we had our first sharing circle for funders and impact organizations in our first pooled fund to speak about their experiences and challenges with a model like this in a safe space. In the lead up, there were nerves on both sides about how it would go. We had to consciously encourage them to share, and soon they warmed up. By the end of the session, they were speaking as equals about issues that they might not otherwise have brought up. For example, the real impact of unrestricted funding from the part of the grantees, and also the funders' challenge of getting buy-in internally from colleagues and superiors, especially when such flexible funding does not lend itself to immediately measurable outcomes. Second, freedom for grantees to define outcomes and their desired impact on the communities that they support. In the monitoring and evaluation process, we ask our grantees to decide the outcomes and impact that they want to achieve with the funding. These just have to be relevant to the fund's overarching objectives. Example, primary healthcare, maternal and infant child health and nutrition, or sustainability. Because we take a participatory approach to defining these, they too are able to do the same and define the outcomes by listening to their end beneficiaries. We recognize that it is important to also provide capacity building support for grantees to ensure that they have the requisite skills to deliver the desired shared outcomes. At the moment, we do not specifically include any program or element of capacity building as part of the pooled funds grants. However, we often connect our grantees with other ecosystem players within our membership base that do provide such support. Recently, we nominated a number of impact organizations within our network to participate in a digital marketing boot camp for nonprofits organized by Lightful, one of our partners from the UK. So how do you see trust-based philanthropy in action? One example from our network is that of Biduk, an impact-oriented lending platform launched by Athena Global Alliance in March 2019. Biduk's mission is to reduce the credit gap for women-led small growing businesses in Indonesia by piloting financial products like loans and developing relationships that will help women run better businesses. Biduk minimizes barriers to these businesses in accessing capital from the formal financial sector. EcoDo, an impact enterprise which delivers unique, locally sourced gift baskets for retail and corporate clients, is a beneficiary of Biduk's approach. Biduk's flexible loan structure allowed EcoDo's founder, Vidya Putri, to prioritize where and when to spend the cash. This was the support that EcoDo needed to weather all the sudden challenges that COVID brought upon her. In addition to the loan, she received help to create cash flow projections and support to even analyze her pipeline so that she could be more strategic in her decision-making. Trust-based philanthropy is not merely about the deployment of unrestricted funding or about the trust in the impact organizations to define solutions. But instead, it is about the practice to drive mutual trust based on an unbiased, data-driven, and transparent philosophy. But this is not easy. There are many challenges to trust-based philanthropy. If trust-based philanthropy was indeed so great, why is it not so common in practice? Understandably, philanthropists are concerned about the misuse of resources. This affects their credibility as funders, as well as the legacy of funding. And this, in turn, contributes to a general cautiousness when identifying partners. In markets like many emerging ones in Asia, where there is both a perceived and real lack of transparency and accountability between funders and grantees, it's even more complicated. There is no real trust in existing systems and frameworks that seek to address this opacity. These sentiments then preserve the traditional approach to grant making, where funders continue to support programs where the outputs and outcomes are tangible and predefined and are more directive about program delivery for this reason. In our experience, managing the philanthropy pooled funds that we have identified, there are some key pitfalls that we should all be aware of. Different funders have different trust thresholds. Intermediaries like AVPN have an important role to play in aligning the interests of diverse stakeholders. In our experience in managing funds, we have found that different funders have different starting points. A funder with whom we have already built a long-term relationship might be more easily able to trust our approach. But for another funder, they might need more time and more information as they build their trust both in us and in the grantees while also getting internal buy-in. Actually, even grantees have to undergo a process of unlearning. Grantees are used to receiving and reporting on programmatic funding. They are used to certain processes themselves and are accustomed to having the power imbalance tilt towards the funder. Funders who want to go on this journey with grantees need to be mindful of this and provide the time and the space for grantees to feel secure with this new dynamic. As funders and resource providers, we must re-envision our approach to monitoring and evaluation. Deploying unrestricted funding is a dramatic shift away from programmatic grant making. As such, it would be unwise and unhelpful really to report on impact numbers on the end beneficiary. The same indicators no longer work. Monitoring and evaluation for unrestricted funding must have smart parameters that go beyond the quantitative and instead track outcomes qualitatively. These outcomes are best identified and defined in collaboration with grantee organizations, sharing equal power in deciding what should be measured and what needs not be measured. So how are we creating a global movement for trust-based philanthropy? Trust-based philanthropy is not new. It's been in practice, particularly in the United States, for some time. But in Asia, it is far less familiar. And we see that we have a prime opportunity to build on the momentum that we have created with our pooled funds to make this commonplace. Change moves at the speed of trust, as Sarah Jeffrey from VTOL Foundation, one of the pioneering funders of AVPN's philanthropic funds, said, "To see the change we seek, I believe that we must do the following. Have ears on the ground and be willing to engage in participatory models of funding. Instead of treating the symptoms, we need more philanthropists to look at how to address the root causes or systemic challenges underlying critical issues. Impact organizations play an important role in this process of diagnosis, providing real-time data that reflects the true complexity of the issue at hand. This shift in emphasis can also lead to collaboration between funders and between a diversity of impact organizations who are all working to address various parts of the problem. We need to be more concerned with outcomes than outputs. We've benefited from this ourselves. In 2021, Moody's engaged AVPN to support high-impact social entrepreneurs and social enterprises, particularly those owned or led by women in Singapore, Malaysia, and Vietnam. In delivering this program, we found that we had to adapt to meet the specific needs of the entrepreneurs onboarded on the program. Moody's took an adaptive approach to monitor outputs and was willing to modify programmatic elements whilst keeping desired outcomes front of mind. In this way, Moody's supported AVPN in addressing these needs, treating us as experts with the right knowledge to drive the program instead of mere implementers. We've carried this forward in our management of the philanthropic pooled funds. One of our grantees from CHISD, or the Center for Indonesia's Strategic Development Initiatives, who was part of our healthcare pooled fund, reflected the importance of being single-minded regarding outcomes whilst remaining flexible in refining outputs. They spoke to how, if they had to deliver a budget amendment report each time that they had to pivot or adjust their plans to address the needs and objectives, they would have been so tied up in paperwork that they would have struggled to focus on necessary, urgent interventions. We must be willing to share information, and this goes both ways. This is the spirit we aim to continue to drive through the sharing circles, as I mentioned before, creating a safe space for funders and impact organizations to share their learnings, challenges, and expectations. This is not a simple undertaking, enabling funders and grantees to speak to one another as equals. And if we are not intentional about taking these steps, the power imbalances will not only persist, but likely worsen with time, with scale, and with shifting priorities. At AVPN, we are entirely intentional about this philosophy and translating it into practice. And we believe that we represent a membership that is willing to react and respond as the needs require with the utmost compassion and openness. Impact creation is innately complex and interconnected, and success depends on new partnerships, oftentimes between unlikely allies, built on trust, humility, and transparency. If we are to have any chance of achieving the SDGs, even beyond 2030, we need to harness all our skills, resources, and networks, and we need to align our ambitions and work together. I wish you all a successful conference and hope that the conversations sparked today will be translated into the action we need to see, the change that we seek. Thank you so much for listening.
Naina, that was perfect. Such a good opening keynote presentation. It's interesting to me that you said this is basically a simple way of building trust, building relationships, yet it's so much more complex than that. And it takes time, as you said, the whole relationship building, especially if you have a donor that's in the United States and the programs are in Asia, it takes time. And I really appreciate the work that AVPN is doing in this space. Thank you so much for sharing today. Thank you so much for doing your work. Naina, please come back to Seattle. We would love to have you here. And thank you again for your work.